Welcome to everyone that is here. I am not identified by any pictures, but I'm Kimberly Davis, and I am the director of LA Louver Gallery, and pleased and proud to bring to you today Rina Banerjee and Alison Saar for a conversation. And there's been so much that's been going on during this pandemic situation with all of us quarantined, but both of these women have very important exhibitions that have both been traveling and will continue to travel. Right now, Rina Banerjee has a major retrospective called Make Me a Summary of the World, a beautiful catalog curated by Jody Throckmorton and from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and Lauren Shell Dickens from the San Jose Museum. The exhibition was recently seen here in Los Angeles at the Fowler Museum, cut short by the pandemic, and not as many people would have been able to see it as possible. So, and Rina's show is now at the Frist Museum in Nashville and has just opened up. It's an extraordinary experience there. So what we will show you now to start is Rina's exhibition, part of it with installation shots from the Fowler, for all of you who saw us here. And then I will show you some of the installation shots of Alison Saar's exhibition, a print exhibition called Mirror, Mirror, that has at Scripps College right now. It's been in 4 different institutions. This is a print retrospective with sculpture, and recent sculptures have been included, and they all come from the generous collection of Jordan Schnitzer and the Family Foundation. We thank you, Jordan, for your generosity in putting this all together and the publication that came along with it. So because people haven't been able to see these exhibitions, I thought the best way for us to start would at least to be to give you a visualization of what they look like in these different places, and then we'll go in to talk about the work and some of the references that are included in all of that. So we're going to turn our attention to some installation shots, first of Rina's exhibition at the Fowler. This is at the Frist, sorry, this is the Frist Museum. And while we can go through all of this, one of the things that's interesting is that because this work is so installation oriented, this is the first time, Rina, I believe you haven't been involved in the installation in some place. So yeah. I'm sure that that was an extraordinary experience for you to, maybe a pleasure not to have to do it, but.
It's very different.
Yeah. And, but by the looks of how it all goes through, and we can just sort of quickly go through and see some of these things, we'll show you some images with the titles, because the titles, of course, are so extraordinary. And then we will, so we'll go through this exhibition, and then we'll look at some of Alison's, and then we'll come back and talk about some specific works. As the details in all of these things, when you can't get up close to them, since you can't be there, they're quite amazing, made up of so many different elements and so many different ideas that come into it, all seeming so timely at this moment. Maybe timely at every moment. We can go through this. And this is at the Fowler. These installation shots are at the Fowler. And amazing the way that they could translate from one place to another. And then these are a few installation shots of Alison's extraordinary exhibition at Scripps College, which you'll have the opportunity to virtually see these things on Scripps College's website. We'll send out some links to those things so you can experience it yourself, but the college itself is not allowing anyone on campus, so a virtual experience is all that will be coming from that. This installation, this catalog is available for those things, and local bookshops here in Los Angeles will have those things. Arcana, I know, has them. So it was very nice for this print exhibition, a true retrospective that has come along with a catalog raisonné of Alison's prints that our team here at LA Louver has put together. Christina Carlos, who manages all of these communications, did an extraordinary job in coordinating the information that is included in this catalog. Couldn't do it without her. So here we are now back at the Frist with Rina, and to both of you, one of the extraordinary, the timeliness of all of the works that you've been making and how you've been able to pull historical references to make work that makes us rethink everything that's going on now, things that have happened in the past and things have come into the future, about how we are reinterpreting history and art history and rediscovering the stories that have been buried or lost. You want to talk about that a little bit in terms of your work? Rina.
Sure. Well, Kimberly, you know, this work was made currently, so that means 2018 when the retrospective began. And I think PAFA wanted me to make this work new, but also related to an older piece that was shown in 2000 at the Whitney Biennial. And that piece, it was specifically about visual aids programming that was happening in New York City, and AIDS itself, the epidemic, which was very much the talk of New York City at the time, but also a problem that was happening in the world, specifically India and Africa. And I wanted to make this piece recreated in relationship to the 2000 piece, but also to think about what's going on now and the narratives that can really be woven into the same idea for the work. The work has this idea of these conduits, these arms, these connective body that attaches itself, roots itself in the world. And it's a way for us to understand through the ideas of how disease communicates with us, coincidentally, what's happening today. It really specifically looks at buildings and how buildings have a sense of this body and this body being recreated. So the drawings that you see behind this figure is a drawing that is what's called a shop drawing of the Columbia's Center for Disease Control. And it is a shop drawing of basically the renovations that would take place that would remake a building in 1968 to become modern by gutting it out, as we say, and placing all these newfangled modern electrical, computer, and ventilation systems to take out the bad air and put in good air to really control the environment and the environment inside the body of the building. So I was really kind of referencing that as a metaphor to consider our histories outside of the US and how they're connected to us, and how whether we like it or not, these boundaries that we produce out of geographical place cannot really dismantle that connection.
And Alison, in a lot of your work in making reference comes into literature and history of how we understand all of that. This piece, White Guys, which is a sculpture as well as a very beautiful print made with the University of in North Texas. Maybe you could talk about some of that.
Yeah, I think, both literature and music, I think, plays a huge role in the work, just in terms of inspiration, and also that as a venue that we're all familiar with, to kind of sometimes look back at histories and how sometimes histories are interpreted through literature and music, and then to kind of look at that again and reinterpret it through art, I think is really interesting for me. I don't actually write. What I love about Rina's work is that she always has all these really amazing texts that go along with her work. So I'll do a little bit of play with that, just in terms of titles and stuff like that. But I think, it was interesting to have this show being at Scripps specifically, because a lot of my really early readings that I think are very prevalent in my work, from Greek classics to contemporary writings, was actually, that's where I first experienced those works. And so it's kind of fun to have this show back where all of this kind of began and those seeds were planted.
Great. The show also out there on the Claremont colleges, it should be stated that there's a show that will open in January that was scheduled to open in
September,
called Of Ether and Earth. Here's the catalog for it. And that is available now in local bookstores as well, and through Pomona College, curated by Rebecca McGrew and Irene Santos. There'll be an exhibition split into two different venues, the Pasadena Armory Center for the Arts, as well as the new Benton Museum at Pomona College. So that's something else to look forward to. It's coming up. We hope we will all be able to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we go on from all of this. There is also, we could go into some of the historical references that have been a part of these exhibitions. And at the Benton College is a new work by Alison called Imbue, a 16-foot bronze sculpture. And that is right outside this new museum. It is outside, so people can see that, at least from the street. So that's been really great. And they've made a beautiful little film about that, which I'm sure will be available for people to see very soon. You want to talk about this and its sense of placement? Because I think that's important.
Yeah.
Water and the issues of all of that.
Right. So, when I was invited by the Benton to do a public piece for the new museum for their garden, it was really exciting. One, because Scripps being my alma mater, and how I really, again, spent so much time on and around this campus. It's changed a lot, not only with this building, but other previous buildings. But I remember when I was there in mid-70s, a lot of, Pomona was really surrounded by this wash, which had actually flooded, I guess, in the 30s. But it's, I guess it's maybe the San Gabrielano River. I hope I'm not messing that up. But I kind of wanted to address sort of that landscape and that history, and also the history of the peoples that were there at one point, and who are, I think there is still a group still up in the mountains surrounding Pomona and Claremont. But so I was really interested in these kind of water deity figures, specifically looking at Yemaya, a transatlantic deity from Yoruba. And so she is kind of balancing all these pots and pans on her head, which kind of become this sort of an entrance way for the spirit to come into the ground. And the idea of the title being Imbue is to kind of really talk about the nourishing, how water kind of will imbue the earth with the ability to flourish and flower and sustain animals and flora and fauna alike. But also I thought it kind of tied in nicely with this being a college campus, and how, going to school and getting an education will imbue you with all these opportunities and ideas and sort of nurture who you become, sort of thing. So I think that title kind of double plays on that. But, you know, my hope is that people can come to this space. You saw that there's these benches around it, that they can come to this space and sort of sit and maybe get sort of refreshed and sort of like have a lave-tete, you know, wash off all of the kind of heavy burdens that we're experiencing here and now. And I think, you know, students especially are stressed out at this time with COVID on top of just normal sort of burden of schoolwork. So I'm hoping it would be a space where people can come and sort of regroup and kind of do a sort of self-cleansing.
And Rina, you've used water as a metaphor through your works as well. There was this one wonderful A World Lost.
Yeah, I mean, this piece, like what Alison was saying, you know, this idea of really cherishing water, which comes through in her sculpture, was something that I was thinking about in terms of how much we rely on it, not only for the everyday, like drinking water, where I'm using on the floor actual cups for glasses of water that we kind of take for granted that we have available water. But, you know, I had this experience of seeing a location on the ground that is just mud, and in India where people dug, and you see the rise of water coming through from the ground because the table water is so high. And realizing that so many people do not have access to water, but at the same time, I'm really aware how much they know about water, how to procure it, secure it, and to take care of it, that I don't have access to here in an urban area. You're really dependent. So the intimacy of being near nature when being around water is crucial in this piece. And it was really a piece about contemplating the world itself being lost because you didn't have access to these very fundamental things that are just not only nourishing, but allow you to meditate, you know, about what is happening in your life. And I think a lot of us think of the oceans in that meditation of water, what it can do for you spiritually, you know, all the rivers in the world, they have both spiritual and commercial gains that we have from it. And also our travel through these waters to other places, crossing rivers. And that's very much part of what my mother experienced near the Ganges, where it was a holy thing to take care of water, not only to understand it as an object, as in holy water, but to be a caretaker of water itself. So those things are really very much part of this work in talking about the land on the bottom.
And of course, the notion of being able to deal with the disasters of water and how they are affected in different places. There are two works that come to mind, of course, from this. Alison, your piece, Breach, which is now very happily in the collection of the LA County Museum. Here it is installed at our exhibition at LA Louver. Do you want to talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, I guess this also kind of harkens back to sort of historic floods and how we're still contending with a lot of the social, economical, and ecological situations here and now with the floodings from Katrina to today. This piece actually was part of two shows that was inspired by a visit at the Joan Mitchell Center down in New Orleans, and having firsthand seen the Treme. That was kind of like my bike path getting to my studio, and how the devastation, even then, some 8 years post Katrina, was still very evident. And I was looking that experience drove me to look at the Great Mississippi Flood in 1926, 1927. And so this piece, Breach, is kind of a response to that, kind of talking about how, you know, a lot of African Americans were sharecroppers on the land. That land was often very low land because it was being irrigated by the rivers, but it also made them very susceptible to flooding. And so when the Great Flood, I mean, it flooded pretty much everyone, but unfortunately, they had absolutely nowhere to go, and they were actually put on these what felt like sort of internment camps. They were basically put on these levees to keep them from fleeing to the north. And actually, when the waters did recede, that was one of the great waves of the Great Northern Migration. So it's kind of talking about, you know, the works kind of balance off talking about sort of African American, Afro, you know, international sort of connections with water, and kind of similar to what Rina was talking about in terms of these waters as being, you know, source of fertility and source of cleansing, but also as the source of drowning and also the source of flooding, and that there's always these two sides to water and having to respect water. And thinking of both not only Yemaya, but also Mamiwata, sort of the goddess of the rivers, and how she can work, you can work with her or she can work against you, and she can be really terrifying. So this is a woman who basically had been flooded out of her home, but she's taken everything that belongs to her and she's balancing them upon her head. So all these articles are probably from about the 1920s, 1930s, 1920s, and are all balanced. So I think she's about 13 and a half feet tall, which was as tall as my studio would allow me to go, the ceiling height. But to talk about, you know, at once their susceptibility and their vulnerability, you know, in terms of not having access to be able to evacuate or any of these things, but also talking about that sort of strength, you know. And so here she is rafting on this small raft, kind of paddling or, you know, pulling her way down this, but everything she owns is being held upon her head.
This piece traveled to a number of different shows, but was very beautifully installed at Lafayette College with the installation of drawings all around it and mud on the water, mud on the walls, and inspired dance, and it brought on a whole circle of things, which was great.
Well, what was really great about that space and how the show kind of formulated around that space was that Michiko had told me that, you know, everything had to be evacuatable because they'd had a history of up to 3 feet of water in the gallery. And so I thought, oh, that's really appealing. So actually I took that mud mark as kind of like the watermark of how high the water was in the gallery, whatever year that was. And maybe was it 2015? I don't remember when that is, but and then that mud actually comes from the river that runs underneath the gallery. And so we went down and hauled up water and mud and then painted the walls with it. So it was kind of a nice sort of marrying with the site and the institution.
And Rina, you've used these ideas here as well.
Yeah, it's also a figurative work, and in some sense, I'm also thinking about real people as being kind of deities that did wondrous things that we struggle to do today. So this particular piece is in reference to Viola Ida Lewis, who was an actual person in the 1860s in New Orleans, and she had a business, and it was a business that she had with her husband, who was a Black Bengali, as they were called. And this was basically Bengalis were migration that came to the United States at Harlem River, and they came from India, where I'm from Kolkata. And these Bengalis married African-American women. And many of the people that they encountered were people who were also leaving the South and migrating. So they kind of joined forces, you may say, and to be able to have the freedom to survive, to have businesses, to take care of themselves. And the Southern churches at that time created welcome houses to create a place where the Black Bengalis could then learn and adopt the new culture in the United States. So it's really kind of an inspirational figure for me in the way that you think of a deity, for example, all that was done gives you courage and a spiritual awakening about the strength of people in order to invent, to run away from oppression. So you see the trail, and Viola is in my vision a kind of rescue worker, and you see wings, and she has this dome which is flower-like, spider-like, and it has this kind of cloth or webbing that it creates a kind of sheen on the fabric. So it's referencing silkworms and silk threads that are pulled in her back. And you can delicately see, because of the lighting, it's hard to see in here, but she is dragging this kind of parachute. So it's about landing on land and being able to take on the kind of battle and struggle of survival. So her arms have these Indian rakes that look like large fingers on the sides, and then she has these really beautiful black glass pinchers or tusks. And I'm thinking of her as a kind of insect, because I think of the kind of movement, the fast movement that is required to survive. And I loved some of the ideas about that Alison was talking about with surviving the drowning, you know, and the fear of detention and containment and running away and finding shelter. All those things come to play with her, with the multiple feet on the floor and her hunched back, and these kinds of miner's lights, as if she is in darkness trying to find her way out. So these little early American sconces are by her side, and the fabric of her wings are from all over the world. And she is kind of a moment in time where she's creating what is the culture of the United States, its new history.
Well, now that we've gone through all the biggest works that could be done over these periods of time when there was space and you could have people help you and all of that, we'll bring things back down again, because during this period of time where we all have been quarantined and are working smaller, more intimate, and through the course of this summer, we've put together an exhibition here at the gallery that showcases new work from both of you. And Rina, in particular, I note that although you've always made beautiful drawings and watercolors, and they were included in all of these things, we've had things that are using a lot of images. This work, particularly here, which is in the show, and another new small work, we have that one too, with these images of these kind of droplets that are all around with us. In some sort of reference to, I'm sure, what's going on. Maybe you could talk about what you've been doing, working from your studio at home now during this period, and then we'll take a look at Alison's new work.
So I think what I'm really came to have really pleasure in the intimacy of being alone in your studio without the company of even assistants or friends, is really these smaller drawings. And they still continue to be a reference to the tropical, which I think has the lure of not only being exotic, but also dangerous. And in my mind, the tropical nature of my work, it's like abundance of lines that create liquidness in the background and on the foreground, and all these droplets that I've been using for a long time now, since the 90s, you know, have become really prevalent even more, and with new meaning, of course, with the pandemic and our fear of droplets on our face from our mouths itself. So it became very literally easy to connect to what the current events are. but a lot of the work is in search of understanding our fear of each other, you know, because of cultural difference, but also because the idea of having different competing desires for profit and for territorial space. And so these lines of liquid that I create with the marble paper, as you see in this drawing, allows you to think of this fluidity as not something that is dangerous or constraining, but allow movement itself, like the movements in rivers. And so there is this kind of sense of the tropical with patterning and foliage, and here are the banana leaves that she's hiding her head under shelter from rain, and these cloudy heads that really kind of is talking about memory and how we use memory in the past to be always present in our minds and in our hearts. And I think that the consideration of history as something, while we think of history as something in the past, is something that we have to live through and are struggling with in order to change the future and reshape it. So these clouds of faces are people who came before you, maybe people who will join you in the future. And so a lot of the drawings that I'm doing is really taking care of all these issues of mobility that we struggle with the pandemic, and was very much part of my work, you know, because it's centered around the kind of how volatile it is to talk about migration and diaspora and foreignness and legitimacy of voice.
Right. And voice and music, I'm just going to take you into the gallery now and show you, this is the second floor gallery here at LA Louver, part of our exhibition. At the far end of it, here in the right side, we have Alison's piece, which we'll have better photographs of, but Nick Cave at the very end of it has used these large gramophone images with powerful arms coming out of them, a chain of hands that's either reaching up to help each other or tearing something down, the eagles sitting on top of severed heads. It all is about the sound of what we have going on around here. But Alison's piece, which anchors at the other side of things, here with Tia Pulitzer and Carmen Argote, beautiful work from her, sitting on top of these beautiful porcelain sponges, and a very light-oriented work by Gisela Colon. But Alison's work here comes up with the power of light, torch song. Maybe we get a better picture of that. And then into can you talk about both the music and the imagery that comes from all of this? And here's a big piece made in the studio. I know we pushed you along this summer, but we were so thrilled with this.
Good. That's what I need, is a match lit under my butt to get going. So always appreciate those deadlines. Yeah, well, you know, I think this originally was an image. Torch Song was originally an image, part of my copaesthetic prints that I'd done with Paul Maloney up in San Francisco. And I had kind of thought, oh, you know, I've never done kind of, oh, there you go, a figure sort of, you know, standing with a full skirt sort of thing. And I think I was also kind of coming off of, well, trying to still cool off, or we're all trying to cool off, but from my last show, Topsy Turvy, and kind of part of what we did for that show was you guys put together a great sort of talk where we did angry songs for angry times. And of course, many of those musicians, specifically Nina Simone and Bessie Smith and Sister Rosetta Thorpe, were all these really powerful women singers who kind of, you know, had some of them very outwardly political, obviously, especially with Nina Simone, but also sometimes they were songs of the blues or sorrow, and sometimes they'd be cloaked with this idea of sort of this romance, but underneath that, there was always these sort of undertones of anger, whether it was issues of abuse, domestic abuse, or issues of racism, or issues of poverty. All of these things were often kind of undertone where, you know, there's this sort of romantic sort of cloak, hence the song, the title Torch Song. So here she is singing, but I wanted to talk about how these women, and men too, but really interested in the women who kind of use their music as weapons. And so her piano keys have become bandoliers, which are, you know, kind of draped over all, you know, also sort of a nod to the Mexican Revolution, Emilio Zapata and Emiliano Zapata, and then all the amazing women that were part of that revolution as well. And so, you know, here she is, she's kind of like singing, and this kind of fire is coming out of her hand. And then she has her piano keys draped over her shoulder, ready to kind of like pull out and shoot everyone down. So I thought it was kind of an important time because, you know, while we are simultaneously going through this pandemic, we are also in the throes of, you know, a real examination, national examination of racial injustice and the persistence of Black men, women, and children being murdered by our law enforcement. And so I thought it was a good time to kind of pull this piece out of my hat.
It's fantastic. Well, I will also just make a plug for the beautiful small print that you made, which we were meant to end on, but that was sold in the course of 24 hours to raise funds for 3 extraordinary organizations here in Los Angeles. And I was very pleased that we had such a great response to be able to do that, called Rise. Being able to do these sort of small works at home. I know that both of you have had the opportunity to just work on a different kind of scale. And you have some new prints now coming, Alison, that are coming along. You're sitting there in the print studio.
The print studio. Yeah, well, go back to Rise for a second, because I do want to like shout out Leslie Ross Robertson, who did the letterpress and printed these things. So that was, you know, I think it was a sort of contribution, because L.A. Louver was really helpful in terms of getting them all out and everything. And
I stuck them all myself into envelopes. I did it.
I just like, whoa. I actually like stuffing envelopes, but of course we couldn't hang out together. So, but yeah, so I think, you know, part of this was, you know, also because I wasn't able to kind of physically and be out there physically as much as I would like to, you know, aside from my own sort of like, you know, getting a little elderly. I was also helping take care of my mom. So we had to really kind of restrict our exposure to a lot of people. So since I wasn't able to be out there in person on the streets so much, I felt this was something that we could do. And it went to 3 really great organizations. So I was real pleased that happened. But yeah, so otherwise I've been, you know, I think I started out doing these little prints. This is one of them. Little girl.
We had
I was able to print here at home. That's called Isolation Blues. So that was really talking about the pandemic in and of itself, and be able to like edition and press it, you know, do it by myself. I think my son helped me pull a couple of, but yeah, right now I'm just cutting some blocks. I can pivot a little bit to show some pieces that I'm working on for Tandem Press, which I was supposed to visit them late this spring and was unable to fly, and then the universities were shut down as well. So I'm just now getting around to building these, and they'll be quite large. You can see they're like 6 feet, maybe almost 7 feet blocks. So that's really exciting. And this is nice to be home. You know, so I go back and forth. When it gets really hot, it's nice to be able to stay home in the canyon and work from home. But meanwhile, trying to get those few pieces, the piece that I have for the new show, the Torch Song, together as well. But, you know, I think it's interesting. And Rina, I mean, you mentioned, you know, having assistants and stuff like that. I haven't, I've kind of been without an assistant for most of this year. Not only because of the pandemic, just because we kind of changed. Well, she found a great job, but I was I think as artists, we're alone a lot of the time anyhow. And so, I think it's great. I mean, we're really fortunate that we're still able to function and do what we love to do. But I think in some ways, I think, it hasn't been that hard hitting, except for finding materials, which is something you and I are obviously is part of our food sort of thing. We can't get together and go to some.
That's one of the joys of foraging through the city and talking to people and finding ways to get materials that are more and more interesting, to have that adventure, before you bring it all back to the studio.
Well, I'm jealous because New York, there you have much better pickings than here in LA because they're trash and trash cans. And New York is just everywhere.
So, Rina, what have you been able to find lately? Are you just buying things online?
Well, a lot of people have been moving out of New York City. There's a big exodus, which left interesting garbage, but quite large size garbage. People's furniture, even businesses, restaurants, bookstores, just everyone so hard hit, and trying to reinvent themselves, I think, in maybe in a new location, but really kind of shedding a lot of stuff. I myself had to shed some things from my storage units in order to, expedite a larger space here. So I was fortunate that my large studio in Navy Yard, I had left in December to relocate myself here before the pandemic. So I was in good shape with both the studio and home being in one place, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. And, talking about assistants, you're working alone and, I don't have a lot of assistants. I have just one, and she's my rock in the studio. And so to not have her all of a sudden was very hard, that human contact, the person you talk to about, what do you think about this? Should I do it this way? Because a lot of it is handwork. So it really slowed me down, even though most of the work, has been delayed because of the pandemic. You still have, this desire to make work at all times, because it's your lifestyle. But I have enjoyed the new garbage out there. The garment district is one such place. Can't even recognize it, like whole blocks empty, dumpsters full of, but it's so sad that I didn't have the urge to go for it. And this kind of carnage that takes place from people leaving. So I felt really fortunate that I wasn't in a situation where I had to commute an hour to the Navy Yard to go to my studio, and my studio was right here to hug. But it was very slow because you're trying to absorb what's happened. And, I'm living here alone. My daughter's in school. So the loneliness was really tough. But I was also, I think, very happy that all this happened during the warmer months of the year. So I really enjoyed having something to do other than my artwork and being on the computer. And it was so nice to go to the park and really witness the nature that was there that I hadn't, taken advantage of. A couple of blocks away is Central Park. And as you can see, a lot of my work has nature in it, but when do I get to go out and see it? So it really allows you to pause and think about what other things should be part of your life. And now Central Park doesn't have the tourists, which I used to complain about, that I couldn't even see the trees because of the people. But now I have the opposite experience, of going there and feeling like it's very lonely. So I'm wishing for all the variety of people that come to New York to come back as well. So it's been tough, you know. I think Alison and I both enjoy, you know, going to flea markets which stopped running, and stores, you know, antique stores, things like that, that allow you to not only just see physically things that inspire you, but for me to like talk to people about where they got this, what do they feel about it, and that really kind of allows you to produce ideas. Like ideas come about not just from seeing and being around these things in the world, but the people who cherish them and possess them, I think, and then finally let it go. So you can see like my chandelier, my sconce chandelier in the back looks a lot like my artwork now that I'm seeing. Yeah, and so I really like to see these things that are old, that look like nature at the same time, even though they're in our house.
I think it's going to be interesting, though. I mean, you're talking about, you know, kind of this sort of shedding of stuff, or I would even say purging of stuff in some ways. And I think, you know, sometimes we get burdened by the things we have around us, and that sort of cleansing and throwing stuff out. Meanwhile, you know, I think for everything I throw out, I drag something else back in. But I think it's going to be interesting in terms of seeing how, one, we're having to think maybe a little deeper, and maybe that solitude has given us the time without kind of deadlines and whatnot kind of burdening us to really be a little bit more introspective, and again, kind of getting rid of stuff and maybe rediscovering stuff within the studio. I think it'll be really interesting to see the work that comes out after all of this, because it's been a real sort of metamorphic moment in a weird sort of way, that isolation, and to see, you know, who we become on the other side, because it's not going to be as it was anyhow, and we're going to have to remake the way we socialize and do all of that for sure. I mean, I think it's a fantasy to think everything's going to be exactly the same, and especially New York, I can't even fathom how that's supposed to work. But
we have this amazing moment where at the very end, we've got an image of Rina's exhibition that was at the Armory Show with Natalie Obadiah. And it was really literally ending on March 9th, the last day that anyone was together with anyone else. You go back into Alison's exhibition at Frieze just 2 weeks before that. And I mean, we were all crowded together in a tent, and, you know, art fairs, everything was crowded into everything else. And it was all very successful at the time that it was all being presented. And in fact, you know, all these works have basically gone out in the world. I know Rina's had some problems with some of those things, but, you know, they were finding an audience, and they will come back and be changed with all of that. So it's nice to think about going back to that, as not necessarily to that, but to, you know, what will come. We're coming closer to the end of our time. We do have a couple of questions. One from Bernice Coleman saying, Alison, I know you're part of a great artistic family that's had influence on you, but Rina, is your family involved in the arts as well?
Yes, my sister's an architect, and she loves, you know, playing with different things like interior design mostly. So there is that. And I think, you know, for a couple of generations that I am familiar with, there has been writers. My grandfather was a writer. He went to school for literary things. My daughter loves poetry, and she's really fantastic painter as well. And my niece in Berlin, she likes painting and sculpture. So she's enjoying that there and doing a lot of work to help with the pandemic there in Berlin, keeping me informed. So there is that we share, you know, in the family, but we're very scattered everywhere. So,
Alison, to both of you, from Carol Weiner, Have you ever worked with students, and how have students responded to the political, social, anti-racist part of your work?
Well, I don't teach full-time per se. I do a lot of visiting with students, and sometimes I work with local high school students. I think it's really inspiring to see how I think for the last 10 years, how really involved they are in terms of things outside of their small world, like really involved in politics um, and I think that's really exciting because I know that there was a generation in between there that was being sort of lackadaisical or maybe a little complacent about things that really were slipping out of our grip. And so I think it's really exciting to see that. And what about you, Rina? Do you work with students at all? Have you been teaching at all, or?
I've been doing a little critique with students, graduate students at Yale. So this year I'm doing it with 4 or 5 students. So it's not a large group. It's more intensely working with those students. And I did that last year. And I worked with, when I was putting up the retrospective in 2018 PAFA, it was really nice to get the students to help me install the show. So I really got to know them, when you're down in the ditches trying to put up a big show. And that was a lot of fun, I love to have that kind of relationship with the students because it's so essential for your own ideas, but also to learn what people are thinking about, what young people are thinking about, and how they receive the world differently, and what they feel has changed and what they think hasn't changed. So that conversation really allows me to grow and hopefully for them to understand the world that I see.
Well, one final question, and it's to both of you, and it can be separately done. It says, thank you, Rina and Alison, for this wonderful insight into your artworks. Both of your works tackle somber and weighting political topics. Yet there's an abundance of joy and playfulness in your forms, materials, and the way your works come together. How do you make this kind of space for joy and play in your studio practice in general, but also during the pandemic?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think after that, after I did that last show and it was so dark and I was like promising myself, yeah, we're going to have something celebratory at the end of the show. And it was really like, it's pretty tough to do that. I think, it's, yeah, I find it really hard to kind of find a real positive, upbeat space and time right now. I think actually what kind of is getting me through this is actually working in the garden and planting things, some of which actually we had lots of tomatoes. So that made me feel like something productive was happening, sort of thing. But I think part of that is also just being outdoors and getting some sunshine probably helped the mental sort of distress as well. But, I think I'm starting to now think about, a future, whether what that future is going to be, I don't know. And maybe, it's almost time to kind of like, looking, maybe it needs to be something fictional in some sort of way to kind of just get us past this point and past this moment. But sometimes we just have to like cajole ourselves into more positive ideas. So.
How about you, Rina?
Well, it has been really hard here just to see Manhattan empty out, to see these, both the stores and people with their moving vans moving out. I just felt sometimes that, am I going to be the only person left here?
Last lady in Manhattan.
So that made it very raw, the experience, because these are people, I moved to a new area in December, so I don't really know people in the neighborhood. There isn't a lot of contact for me to know what they're thinking, what they're doing. So it was very hard, and And I think I grasped that I needed to be in the minds of other people. So for me, I read a lot of books. I could still order on Amazon. And because all these amazing stores and restaurants and tea shops and coffee shops that allow for you to engage with people even when you don't know them, I didn't realize how essential that was for me to feel connected with people, even though you don't know them personally. And so I got that out of reading books, really. And I got that from, working on other things than my artwork. I'm a big avid collector of textiles, and I have closets and closets of textiles. I have like 5 closets in my 1-bedroom apartment, which is why I like this place. And I began to start sewing, So I sewed a lot. I sewed clothing, masks, bags, all these things that could go for sale if anyone wants them. But, I made, upholstered my couch. I learned how to do that. So I just wanted to learn how to make things, other than artwork. I think I gravitated towards painting the most, just to hold a brush, but it was really hard to make my hand move. It was easier to sew. Sewing is so meditative, and so quiet at the same time. And you could listen to music, look out the window, and so that was really brought a lot of love for me in my experience.
Well, I say thank you to both of you. Thank you, Rina. Thank you, Alison. Thank you to all of our visitors. And I'm sorry if we haven't been able to get to everyone's questions. We will, in fact, let them be known so they can perhaps be answered separately. But thank you all for being a part of it. And we look forward to visiting and being in touch with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye, friends.
Thank you.
Bye, Alison.
Bye, Rina. See you soon.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.